I am, as some of you know, but many of you don't, Gary Ackerman. I'm president of the Book Club of Washington and would like to welcome everyone today to a virtual tour of the Howard Iron Works Printing Museum and Restoration Facility. We have a nice crowd on hand, over 40 people signed up. I'm going to ask everyone except the presenters to remain on mute during the tour, and we'll have time for Q&A after. You can, if you have questions as we go along, you can put them in the chat or later when we go into Q&A. First off, I would like to thank Book Club of Washington member Art Sato for bringing this remarkable collection of printing presses to our attention. There's Art. Give it a little wave, Art. There we go. And Art is an assistant professor of graphic design at the Creative School, Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson University. He's taken his classes to Howard Iron Works for them to see these remarkable presses. Howard Iron Works is located in Oakville, which is just about 20 miles or so outside of Toronto. Art and Polly Hayes, his international research intern, will accompany us on our tour today. Polly is from the United Kingdom, where she's studying English literature at Manchester University. She's working with Art on a 3-month project. I hope she's enjoying her time. Here we are, Polly, this side of the water. Art will be making his own presentation to the Book Club of Washington on August 28th. It's entitled International Escapades of Book Lover, during which Art will take us around the world to see outstanding books from leading libraries and museums he has visited on his travels. We will host this event soon and hope you can attend. Book Club members will be receiving a wonderful keepsake designed and printed by Bonnie Thompson Norman with suggestions from Art. So if for any of you who are not a Book Club member, I encourage you to join. Now, for today's event, first a quote: "The most powerful machine ever developed by man was not the nuclear reactor nor the computer. It was the printing press, without which neither would have seen the light of day." This statement is from Nick Howard, who, along with his wife, Liana Howard, founded the Howard Iron Works Printing Museum and Restoration Facility to realize their dream of creating a museum of printing history focusing on machinery from 1830 to 1950. This is possibly the largest collection of hand iron presses in the world. Each piece is carefully dismantled, expertly cleaned, and reassembled. The restoration process requires a thorough research to ensure completeness and authenticity. Together, the collection represents key building blocks in the advancement of the printing process. The Howards have also assembled an extensive collection of printed related books and technical and trade journals. The museum is an outgrowth of Howard Graphic Equipment Limited, founded by Nick's father in 1967. Since then, Howard Graphic Equipment has grown to be a premier supplier of pre-owned and preconditioned printing equipment with customers in over 72 countries. This business has stimulated the Howard's interest in earlier printing presses and provided the expertise and facilities to restore them to working order. Today, Nick will show us illustrative examples from the collection. To see them all, you would need to add Howard Iron Works to your itinerary on your next trip to Toronto. Before we start the tour, however, I would like to mention one other upcoming program in addition to Art's. Stuart Spencer will be completing his series of talks on a presentation called Legacy on August 14. Information on that event is posted on our website. Now, here's Nick.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Howard Ironworks. I'm really glad that you could take some time to be with us today. And thank you, Art, for helping to arrange all of this for us. I'm going to start right here. This is kind of our offices, but we have a selection of various iron presses and some cylinder presses in this area. And I'm going to start with some of the more interesting ones. I'm sure that you're all familiar with these style of machines, the figure 4 hand iron press. This is one that we restored. It's from 1846. It's got a rather old serial number. And we've also remade the finials for top and bottom, which were missing when we got the machine, and put new leather straps and made a new frisket and tympan for it. This is a machine that is a Albion style. It was made by a company called W. Knotting in London. Knotting was in business up until only a few years ago, big in steel rule dies. But this particular machine was made in 1883, and it celebrates the wedding of Princess Alexandra to Prince Albert in England. And this machine is our oldest Colombian. It's from 1834. There are, of course, older ones, but this machine was built the year that George Clymer, the inventor, died in London. And you can see the date there if you zoom in on it. We actually bought this one in England from an estate sale. And so we know a little bit more about this than we do of some of the other iron presses, because there is a bit of a trail of its history. We also have
Nick,
a model.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
I wanted to just comment just really quickly on the condition of the three machines we've seen, and the elaborate designs that they have on them. You've obviously done some restoration on these. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, we actually did these quite a few years ago now, but they were all completely stripped and restored. A lot of extensive work was done. For example, this casting here, which is brass, we ended up having to make that. That was missing. I remember that on this one machine. These handles, the pull handles, are new. They were not salvageable. A lot of bolt issues that you ran into with these, especially the bolts, the hook bolts to hold the platen to the fist. There was a lot of work there involved in that. If you go over to these machines over here, these are also restored iron presses. This is a little Imperial from England. There's another one of those in Toronto at Massey College, has one of those. Small little Hopkins and Cope, which of course is still a pretty popular press among letterpress shops that want to print with an iron press. And this Britannia, this being 1837, was made in Leeds, England, and it's a pretty rare machine. I'm not sure how good it is, but it's a pretty rare machine. So we spent a lot of time with this machine, and getting some help from some other museums and libraries around the world, including the Rylands Library in Manchester. That's for Paulie, where we were able to figure out how to make all the rear parts that were missing on this machine. So we do all that here in the shop, and if we have time, I'll show you the shop. We also have a library, and this library is strictly print related. We have reference books on one side, and periodicals like the Inland Printer, British Printer, Deutsche Drucker, Druckspiegel, their Polygraph, some Canadian magazines. And on this side, mostly it's historical. So it's either manuals on machines or typography books on type styles, that type of thing.
Remarkable. Yeah.
And the light and the fireplace works. Not that we need it right now. So if we look over on this side over here, we've got this very interesting Hoe newspaper press. It's called a sextuple. And it was built by the Hoe Company in New York, taken to the Columbian Exposition in 1893 in this cabinet. And it's actually a working model of the massive sextuple newspaper press of its time. It'll actually print a small newspaper if we're using a hand crank. And we got this from Man Roland in Chicago. And we're just thrilled to bits to have this because it was all made by hand, and it's a very large model, and it's also a working model, and the effort and skill that went into that is just amazing.
Wow.
We have a
So the real machine would be
Yeah.
almost as large as the would be 10 times as large.
well, it's hard for you to gauge how big the room is. Yeah, 10 times would be I think it'd even be a little bigger than that.
Yeah.
You'd need a very tall ladder to get to the ribbon deck at the top of this thing.
Yeah.
And I forgot how wide it was, but it was really two duplex machines brought together to create this, what they call sextuple, because newspapers were getting sold more and more, and the run lengths were getting longer. And Hoe was the inventor of the folder for web folder. And so they were always big in newspaper presses.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Lejeune, not often seen in North America. It's a machine that was made by Lejeune in Brussels. That's why it's got the Belgian lion at the top. And it's the original early design of the Cope Albion using these links here. You look at these links, they call them links because they look like they're links of a chain. And these links were constantly breaking, and Cope went away from those and built a newer style machine, which is the one you see mostly. You don't see too many of this type anymore, but this is a copy of Cope's famous Albion, and it's also an early machine. And then this is an Acorn, an Adams Acorn, and it's a little bit different than the Otis Tufts. Otis Tufts, the turnbuckle goes this way, the opposite to this. And it's a little rarer than this Adams press. This one we got in Utah, and we restored it. And it's a nice piece of our collection. It's about 1832.
Wow.
The one next to it to the left is a copy of a Stanhope machine with the auger screw. You can see the auger screw there. And this is a French machine. It's probably made around the 1850s, I think. It's not nearly as old as the original Stanhope, but every library, every museum or library needs to have something that's like a Stanhope. We also have a nice example of a drum newspaper press, or a country press. This is a Cincinnati type foundry press. It's got its name here on the ink fountain. We restored this one. It's a little bit unusual because it's very low to the ground. We have another one in the museum, and it's quite a bit taller. And we're really glad to get this. We got this in Indiana, and it was a mess, and we had to restore it. And it's a lovely, lovely machine. We also have a good selection of lithostones. Most of them are Canadian. They came from somebody who worked at one of the largest offset printing companies in Toronto, a company called Rolf Clark Stone. There's their letterhead right there. I don't know if you can see it. That building actually in East Toronto still exists. They don't, but there's a lot of companies that have come and gone that are on this board. And it's a nice piece of history. We've also got about 500 more stones outside in storage. So if you want to come this way, I'll take you into the museum. We got some curio cabinets here with lots and sods, mostly to do with manufacturers. And we like to keep nameplates. So you'll see on the board here and over to your right, if Liana pans around to the right, you'll see various nameplates from machines that we've had through the shop, or we've been lucky enough to get. This one here, for instance, a very interesting plate. It was on a man Roland, which Roland at that time, offset press delivered to Japan. It was 1,000th press, 1974. The oldest plate I think we have up here that I know of in Europe is the 1910 plate from Schnellpress and Fabric Modeling. That's in Austria now, but it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire then. And that plant actually is owned by Koenig & Bauer today. So we have a little, what we call a print room. And what we do in here is not much. We have a little Vandercook #4 and a T-Platen. We keep our wood type in here and our cuts here and extra furniture here. And we've got a couple of imposing tables here in stones. And any chance we get where we get some little artifacts, you know, to cut stereos. This is a German machine to cut stereo plates. This is obviously a type high gauge from Bacher. This is an American steel rule cutter. We've restored all of these. And this one is a flexo plate or a stereo or a flexo or a thin plate gauge for measuring the thickness of the plate. And then we come into the museum. And in the museum, the front area of the museum is a bit of a mixture of different types of things. So we have a lockup of the New York Times, Men Walk on the Moon. This is the original lockup that was at the Times. And that's a facsimile, of course. But this is the original lockup that was used to make the mattresses, which then went ahead and made the stereos. So we're very fortunate to have this actual original composition. We have some more Albions here. They're here for a reason, because we have a lot in storage, but these ones are specific to a certain date. This one, for example, Jonathan and Jeremiah Barrett were the executors of the estate of Mr. Cope when he died. And the first thing they did is slap their name all over it. And if you look at the legs at the bottom, you'll see it, Cope executors, and them on the top mantle. This one is from 1831, and that's the year that Cope died. And so that's why this one is here. This is a Colombian, of course, but it was ironically made by Cope. So it's a bit like Ford making a Chevy. You know, the Albion machine was very distinctive, had a much different way of applying pressure to the form as compared to the Colombian. But the Colombian, even though it had all of this Americana all over it, it was still considered in England the best printing press that could exert the most pressure. So we have several examples of this Colombian made by other people other than Clymer. This was made by Wood and Sharwitz. This was made by Wood and Co. Wood and Company. This one is from 1840. This one's 1861. This one, it was made by William Carpenter, who was the foreman in Clymer's business when he died, and he took over the business. And this is a bit of a nondescript one made by V&J Figgins, which was a supplier of printing type and furniture and machines. And this is from 1874. So we did this one in purple because, or pink, sorry, because we were, and we still are hoping that this one will be donated to a hospital and help raise some funds for breast cancer research. And we figured no one else has ever painted one pink before. This is a St. Louis type foundry. This is typical Washington, and it's a typical machine that was really just a copy of the original figure 4 press. Very nice machine, probably around 1880, nicely decorated. This is another classic hoe. This is from 1849. It's a full scap size, if you could see the name on the platen. And it's pretty small. It's a nice, cute one. So this one here, again, we had to make the frisket and the tympan. It was all missing. And it was a lot of work. And if we come over onto this side, you'll see, first of all, with this banner that's on the wall, this is a photograph of the Heidelberg stand in Leipzig in 1914, the Bugra show. And of course, this opened, I think, in May of 1914. And of course, that's exactly when the war, a month later, the war was going in Europe. And so not many people came. The exquisite press that you can see in the middle of the photo is also the same press that we have just below it down here to the left. Now, this press that you're looking at now is exactly the same model, except this one, it was made in 1920. You have the date there. That one we know is at least 1914. So they didn't make any real changes to the machine between those two dates. We have a rather old Heidelberg windmill. This is from 1927, one that we restored quite a long time ago. We've actually printed with it. It has very few features that the newer Heidelberg windmills have. This is one that was one of the last ones made in 1985. And we're comparing the two. You can see there is lots of similarities, but there is a lot of differences too. The one on the left, the old one, doesn't have any guides whatsoever. So the only registration is from your gripper. It has no thrust bearing at the back. So if you overloaded the machine somehow, and it couldn't stop, something will break, where all those features are on the new one. And then when you wanted to stop feeding, you had to pull the sucker. You had to pull the hose off. Now we come to some more interesting machines that are not really that common or seen anymore. This is a Harris E1. And this is, they nicknamed it the Little Wonder. This one's from 1899. And this took us a lot of time to restore. We had to manufacture a lot of parts for this. We spent a couple of days at the Smithsonian going through the files and the drawings from Harris Intertype, which are at the Smithsonian. And we were able, through that, to manufacture all the parts that we needed to make. All these takeoff wheels here were missing. We printed on this machine. This is capable of running 18,000 an hour. And it was able to do that in 1899 without one ball bearing, with about 7 taper pins only. And it had a trip system and a missheet system. So the feeding system is the shuttle feeder, which you can see over here. And it's set by a governor foot, very much like any mailing equipment. If any of you are familiar with mailing equipment, the top load, bottom feed mailing equipment is very common. So Harris found that you could feed cards, you could feed envelopes. They were even doing milk caps on these machines. The biggest problem that the two Harris brothers had with this machine is nobody really believed them when they sold the client that they could run at that time 15,000 an hour, when everyone else was running 800 to 1,000 an hour with manpower by feeding one at a time. And that was their biggest. That was the biggest problem with this. So it's an amazing piece of history, and it drove technology so far so fast that the public, the printing industry itself, couldn't grasp what this machine could do for them. They simply wouldn't believe it. So we're really proud and happy to have this machine. We also have a bigger one. It's called the Big Brother, which was made a few years later. We have 3 of them actually, and we're going to restore one of those. It's about twice the size of this machine. And from that Big Brother is where Harris developed their first offset press in 1906. As you probably know, Harris was one of the first to get into the offset business. Now, speaking of Harris, we've just finished this machine. This is a Harris Seibold Potter. It was made in 1935. It's a model LSB. It's an offset press, and we've actually printed on it. It's not fun to print on. We took a long time to restore this because it was also in a bit of a mess. It's a 17 by 22 press, single color, and we recreated an ad that was run on the Harris. You can see the sheet here. It was run in the publication magazines for this thing. I mean, we rewrote some of this copy here. But what's really interesting about this LSB is during the war, Harris, like most of the manufacturers, were not allowed to make any printing machines. So they were engaged by the Army to build a special press to print maps. They took this machine and they reduced it. And the height of the machine was about this high because they needed to lighten it up and reduce it in weight so they could put it in the back of a truck. And the only one of those I've ever seen, because the records of how many are made are not known, is in Beijing at the printing museum in Beijing. They have one. So it's quite a bit of a story. This LSB was very popular, and as more and more printers were getting out of letterpress, the first press they would probably have bought is something like a Harris or a Chief. And this is a good example of that. This machine over here is a typical German stop cylinder machine. It's called Piccolo. It's made by a company that's now owned by Koenig & Bauer. This one came from Belgium. We restored it. It's made to be hand cranked, so you'd have 2 people operating it. You'd have one person turning the hand wheel here and another person feeding the sheets. And being a stop cylinder, it's a pretty simple machine, and it doesn't vary much from other machines that were made, including the one next to it, which is a lot newer. This one, I'm not sure, probably is going to be the mid-20s, this one. This one is probably the early 50s. This is made in Berlin. This is an automatic, and there are a few of these machines in North America. It's a bit of an unusual one because it's not much bigger than the Heidelberg Platen size. It's also a stop cylinder, and it handles a really small sheet, but it's fun to run. And we've completed it and then printed on it already. While we're on the topic of cylinders, Heidelberg is the only manufacturer, the only successful manufacturer to not use the stop cylinder mechanism for their cylinder presses in Europe. This is a continuous revolution machine. All of the Heidelberg cylinders were continuous revolution. And this one is one of the last ones. So this is newer than what should be in our museum, but I wanted to get one of the last ones, and we restored this. This is a model KSD, so it's an 18 by 25, and it's all set up for printing. So you could print with it. It was die cutting where it was before, but you could print with it. It's a beautiful machine. This is a Victoria. There's some of these machines spread out to North America. It's a copy of the Golly, the American design machine made in New York. in Connecticut. It's a very nice machine. This one has the feeder, the original style feeder that swings out. It's a terrible feeder. And so you won't find too many with the feeders on them because they were just so hard to operate and run. We've actually videotaped us running this one, and it's really a little frustrating because there's not a lot of air, vacuum air pressure. And this is the only safety on the whole machine. This stops this part because it's going back and forth from hitting you in the head. So this is kind of an important guard. And we restored this one, and this would have been built before World War II. Should we touch on the Colts? The original platen press that Victoria and others, such as the Phoenix in Germany, copied was the Colts, was the Golly machine that had been made by Colt, the firearms company. And then, of course, Thompson worked for Colt and started making his own machines and eventually made them in Long Island City. This particular one is from 1888, Colt's Armory. And so we bought a pistol, which is a Thunderer, that's from 1887, and we know that for sure. It's got the Colt symbol on the grip, the same as the press on the side. And that pistol and this press were made in the same factory. And so it's a little bit of history there with the two. It's not a very beautiful machine, but still very popular today. These Colts, these parallel impression machines, because they're such a good printing machine. And the way the platen moves, it swings up and then pushes in straight. A lot of people call these clamshells, but they're not clamshells. If you wanted to see a clamshell, you could look at other machines like these machines here. These are clamshells. These little pilots, they just swing open and close. Yeah, that's our little pencil printing machine. It's made in New York City, and it uses a rubber plate there, which we've not got in the machine right now. And we actually printed some pencils. And the pencils just kind of roll off the end of this as they're being printed. They roll off and fall onto a tray. So these little novelty machines were popular, I think, amongst printers. We've had this for well over 50 years. And it must have been at a print shop somewhere that we bought. And the printer must have bought it because he needed a sideline or wanted an extra revenue stream for his printing shop. And that would have been it for sure. And in these cabinets that we have here, we've got a variety of different tools. This particular one is for bookbinding. It's not all of them, but a good selection of our bookbinding tools. And one of our good friends, Keith Felton, runs a bookbindery nearby. And Keith did a couple books for us. And I asked him to use our tools to finish the books. And all the decoration here was done with the tools that are around it here. And now we're in the alleyway. Liana designed this because we needed a place to be able to put up pieces of flat art. They could be posters, or random bits of history up here. Some more relevant to printing than maybe others are. But there's some interesting artifacts up here. Some of these things, when we were rebuilding printing presses, we printed, these were posters that we gave to clients showing our machine with different the different units on an offset press, the ones that we rebuilt the most. And Heidelberg ended up using that scheme too for the Speedmaster. And down below, we've got different tools that were used in the trade, gripper systems, things like Zerk grease guns, the old English oil guns down below there, looks like Aladdin's lamp. Pre-press, we've got the original charters for when the Toronto Union joined the National Typographical Union in New York, and they joined in 1866. And then that union was changed to the ITU, International Typographical Union. That's the original charter for the Canadian membership, and we're lucky. We're kind of glad that we have that. There's several other charters here and different things that are related to the Typographical Union. This one is Typographical Union Charter from 1893. And there's the bookbinders, Brotherhood of Bookbinders, photo engravers. You know, those were called lots of different unions at that time. And samples of different printing. You get a wide variety of people that come into the museum, and some want to spend time looking at the type. So all these cabinets that are along here, they're all full of type. And we also have some Hebrew type, and we have quite a bit of Chinese type. And the idea here with these samples here is to show people various types of ways of putting an image on a piece of paper. You know, these are rubber flexo plates. This is for flexible packaging. That's Maxwell House coffee. These are gravure plates that would be wraparound plates that would have been used in the gravure industry. We have a gravure cylinder here, probably off of Chambon. That's for Red Rose coffee bags or something. And of course, with printing, you get different kinds of things that maybe fascinate some people. We've got pre-war and during World War II Germany currency, hyperinflation currency. These Bank of England notes here, these £5 notes. One is real, and the other one was produced by prisoners of war in a concentration camp. It was called Operation Bernard, and there's lots to be written about with that. It's a fascinating story about how they had to emulate and get exactly the right paper, and how the prisoners, mostly, they were almost all Jewish, did all the engraving, hand engraving in the plate to produce these notes. They were pretty well undiscernible from the originals. And this section over here, we've got number 31 linotype. And this is a Model L linotype. This is a pretty old linotype. I think it's from 1925, this one. We have an older Intertype. And we have this Manin caster from Japan. It's about 1970, so it's not very old. But we have all the mattresses for the Chinese type for this. In fact, you can still see some type in the machine. So you would type one image at a time, and they would just flow out here. And if you didn't catch them by the time they got to the end, they would just fall into a bucket, but you would build them up here. And so it's a very interesting machine. You can still see these in places like Korea. I would imagine even in China, maybe. Of course, in Japan, there's still some letterpress specialty places, like the museum in Tokyo has quite a few of these. They're much smaller they're more like a Thompson type caster that we would have over here. Of course, you have a Ludlow, paper cutters, standing presses, quite a few standing presses, various types of guillotines or paper cutters, whichever you prefer. This is a Bremer wire stitching machine. This was used to actually stitch metal staples into a book, a case-bound book. Of course, they found out that they would break or rust and didn't sell well. So this machine had a short lifespan. You'll see one of these at the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz. Now, we got this one also in Germany, and somebody by hand would operate it. There's an interesting story about this machine because it was kind of invented in 1876 by an American by the name of Hale, who then took his thoughts and ideas to two brothers in Philadelphia who were machinists and asked them to make it for him. They did, because he had a contract to supply some of these to the GPO. But then they took all the plans and drawings and left back to Germany. And this time they went to Leipzig. They were from the north of Germany, but they went to Leipzig where all the book printing was. And they started manufacturing these as their own machines. So everybody today knows the Bremer company as an amazing German bookbinding company. But it was actually this guy, Hale, was the actual inventor of that technology. And he never sued them, never said a word. Over here, past King Tut, we have probably our oldest still under press. This is a country press again. It's made by Potter. It says C. Potter Jr. New York, but it was actually made in Rhode Island, and it wasn't made by Potter. It was made by Petrel, but he put his name on it. This is a beautiful example of a very old machine, and we know exactly to the year when this was made, 1865. So it was the year of the end of the Civil War. It's missing some parts. We made some parts. We printed on it. Not fun to print on. But the way it's designed with the Corinthian columns, and it's all cast. It's a pretty rough cast, but it's just an amazing piece of history. And you think about what this could have actually done within its lifetime. We got this in Southern Illinois. We have a German machine that was common in Germany. It's a planetary drive bed. If you see this big gear here, the smaller gear moves around this gear, and that moves the bed back and forth. We got this one in Holland. It's made by a company called Smith Klein Forest and Bone. Forest and Bone. They were in Johannesburg. They eventually became the company Miller, not the American Miller, but they became part of the American company Miller. It was always known as Johannesburg. They basically were in business until 1992. So it's a long time history of this company. They can also trace, two of those guys can trace their roots back to Koenig & Bauer. Most of the manufacturers in Germany, the early ones like Reichenbach from MAN and these guys, they all trace, and Heidelberg, Andreas Hamm, they all trace their time back to Koenig & Bauer. This is a stop cylinder machine. So you notice how small the cylinder is compared to the American newspaper press over there, the Potter. This particular press is a Hoe, same company who made that newspaper press and the hand presses. This one is a metal decorating machine. It's also a lithographic press. It's obviously was built on the foundation and the platform of an old letterpress cylinder machine and customized or modified. But this is a true lithographic press. It has a dampening unit here. You can see the cloth covered dampener. And you have an inking unit here with an ink fountain, etc. over here. And inside this unit here, we have a big piece of cast metal, but originally it would have had a stone like that, a lithostone, that would have been fit inside here. And they had jack screws so you could lift it up and down because as you know, the stone, after you polish it, it gets smaller. But this was the only way to print on metal. We call it tin printing, but it was never tin, it was always steel. But tin printing or metal decorating, the old cans that we all remember, or most of us do, the 3-part cans, like the old soda cans and whatnot, they all had a lid and a base and they're all flat. There's some old beer cans and remember the old oil cans. There was a lot of metal decorating going on. And this was hand fed. And because the way it was designed, each sheet would have had to be pulled out right away and put into a drying rack. You couldn't allow one sheet to go on top of another because they would smudge. There was obviously nowhere for the ink to absorb into the substrate. We have an old Heidelberg cylinder here. This is the year Heidelberg started to remake their original cylinder was 1949. They had designed this machine in 1935, basically sold none because of the war and having to gear up for the war. They started again in 1949. This is how old this one is. That's why you see the old logo here. This one we bought in Holland. We've had this for quite a while. It's a 20 by 27 inch machine, which is smaller than the 2128. Which started around 1951, I think, the little larger size cylinder. And Heidelberg ended up being dominant with the cylinder presses up until they stopped making them around 19, I think, 80, 81, something like that. Fantastic machine. This is a Wharfdale, a British Wharfdale. Plenty of these around in the UK. So the few in Australia, New Zealand, places like that. I don't remember any in Canada. I just heard there's one in Calgary at a museum. They came in all sorts of different sizes. This is also a stop cylinder. And this is a Dawson, W. Dawson made machine. But there was another guy by the name of Payne who actually had built them first, and these three guys got together and they were building these machines. This one we got in England in a little town called Cheddar, and we used to have this in our reception in our other building. It's a very interesting machine. It's a bottom feed. We have another machine like that, again a stop cylinder, but it's easy to feed. It was actually pretty easy to run, and this fast flyer was a device where there was a set of grippers up here. And after the sheet was printed, these grippers on this cylinder here would open, take the sheet, bring it out to the fly, and the fly would throw it onto the table. These are copies of the Heidelberg Platen. They were probably the ones that were most used. Other than the T Platen, they were made in Czechoslovakia. This one is from 1958. It's a grapple press. And that one is from 1985. It's also grapple press. So you can see where they advanced. The Czechs were making these machines much longer than Heidelberg. even though they had originally copied everything from Heidelberg. In fact, this old one has the head same as Heidelberg. Whereas if you look at the new one, they had to change that because of patent lawsuits. They changed it to a completely different kind of a head. But as Heidelberg would tell you, it was always hard to sue somebody behind the Iron Curtain. We also have some proof presses here. This is a Vandercook 219, 219 press with an adjustable bed. We restored this one. It's from 1954. It's a very nice machine, very heavy. It's a power machine, not particularly safe. That's why a lot of folks have taken these 219s and put a hand crank on them and bypass the motor to make it a little safer so that they were doing the work, but it's a little heavy going. This is a two machines here that we just kind of passed by quickly. This is a KRZ or KRZ. And this is a rotary letterpress machine. This is when Heidelberg was starting to get into the thin rotary steel back plates, and it could print two colors at one time. They were a little late bringing this machine out because a lot of folks had moved away from letterpress at this point, and these plates were getting expensive. And of course, the quality wasn't there. So other than them selling them in Europe, places like France were quite popular with these. They didn't really sell too many. This is another one that's really, really rare. Most of these have already been sent for recycling. This is a SRDW. It's from 1969. Again, it doesn't quite fit the scheme of things in the museum, but it's a machine that we always wanted because this is similar to that KRZ. It's a two-color rotary, but it's a perfector. That's what Schon and Wiederdruck means, one and another. It means you print both sides of the sheet at the same time. And this was Heidelberg's response to printing, to pocketbook printing. They started this design in 1967. So we have the shells out of them. They're behind, they're not in the machine now, but one shell would be here and here. And you could print black ink normally, paperback books, 24 pages, 32 pages, depending on what size it was, pocketbooks being small, probably at least 32 pages. And they would already be perfected or printed on both sides of the sheet and done. And they could go immediately to the bindery. The big issue here was they were a little late coming out with this, just as they were with the KRZ. And the printers that were doing this type of book printing didn't want to use plates anymore. They wanted to go to offset. Offset was just so much faster. So it's a very nice machine, and we're hoping to print on it. It's got a Speedmaster feeder, which is kind of interesting. A lot of these features that are on this machine, you could see came later on with the Speedmaster. And then we have an example of a two-color rotospeed. This is an offset press again from Heidelberg, 1967. It was never a good machine. That's why it's here, actually. We sold some rotospeeds in our time, but not this tight. This is a chain transfer. It was the worst of the worst, which is again why we have it here. So it's an important part of the history of the printing industry. Heidelberg is known for such wonderful presses, but back in the 60s and up into the early 70s, before the Speedmaster, their big press was this rotospeed. It was a mirror image machine, which means that these two are opposite to each other. So a pressman could go in between the units here, and you could put the plates on here, wash the blankets, and you could turn around, sit on that seat, and do the same thing here. That was, if you had a 4-color, then you had the same thing after the other two units. And over here, we've got a Thompson. This is a British Thompson. wasn't really that popular in North America. It was made by these Thompson before World War II. At that time, they used the same feeder mechanism, the helicopter feeder head system with the Geneva motion as Heidelberg. But after the war, Heidelberg sued them and they had to remove it, which is when Thompson came in with a unique design for their press. So the sheets are fed here down and from there over. In fact, I could probably show you. Some people like all different teams, and probably get elected. I find it a little awkward, but I guess if I was working with it every day, it would be probably a pretty good machine if I used it all the time. So all the machines that I'm showing you, except for the rotospeed, which we don't want to bother powering up, are all workable machines. This is a Kelly Model B built in the mid 30s. We've restored this one. Quite a few of those still in existence. Not the easiest machine to run. This is a graphics proof press. It's a very large one. It will print up to 20 by 28 inches. So we use this to print some of our bigger stuff, bigger posters. I can go bigger than that even. That's a Toronto Star front page. But this can do a lot of different things. It's a total power machine. You've got a wash up. It's got its own ink fountain, which I haven't got in there right now, which slides up in here. So if you did a long run, you could put the ink fountain in, and basically it's just like a regular press. You wouldn't have to stop and cap ink on rollers. It's Dutch height because it came from Holland. So we put some offset plates in here to build it up. It's got a lot of safeties, which is really nice to have. I mean, it's pretty well, it's got everything. It's a fully automatic machine. It'll actually take the sheet off of the drum and deliver it onto the belts under here so that you don't even have to worry about taking the sheet off. All you have to do is feed the sheet. And we have a Mercedes, which is a Glockner style machine. There was quite a few different Glockners. The original one was made by Paul Glockner in Leipzig, but there was quite a few companies that were even made in the UK. These were made in other countries as well. This happens to be made in Holland, and it's from 1954, and it's made from a small company called Mercedes, and they made several different machines. So when we printed on this one, we printed a little historical data on this particular machine, and it's a 15 by 22, and it's actually a fun machine to run. There's lots of things going on with this machine when it's running, with sucker bars moving in and out. It's a stop cylinder. You can see we kept a locked plate inside there. And of course, we have a couple verticals. We have one of the last ones made. This was from 1974. This was actually made for Deluxe Check in Minneapolis because they were still buying these from Neely because they had modifications done on these to run checks. So we were trying to find the latest one we could get so we could restore it. We ended up having to buy another one, not as old, not as new as this one, because we were missing some parts. And we ended up taking the parts off one and making one out of both. So we're quite happy the way this turned out, including the original paint color that Mealy used. I don't know why they painted it that color, but this one is a 1926 Mealy verticals. I'm sure that there's quite a few of these on the West Coast still. You can find these everywhere. These came out in 1921. It was designed by a Milwaukee designer, who sold the rights to Mealy. So we wanted to try and restore an older one so you could see the two together and see how much they had changed. There's quite a bit of difference between the two, but anybody that ran the old one can run the new one and vice versa. And we got both of these running and printing. They're quite lovely machines, actually. Even the cylinder, the vacuum system for latching the cylinder, we got them all both working, and that's usually where the problem is. This is another Heidelberg 10 by 15 with an original foiler. This is from 1985. That's why it's here. So it's one of the last ones made. These ones came from Belgium, and there's a nameplate there that tells you the date, and then they have to put a safety plate on there that says it conforms to the certain regulations. So this one has all the latest guards. This is a pouch made in Germany. Ticket printing machine. We got this rebuilt. This will actually print the ticket and number the ticket and perforate the ticket. And you can see the perforations are in here. It'll actually even slit the ticket. If the ticket was wide enough, you could slit it and run it onto 2 rolls. So we ran this on some open houses. It's a bit of a pain to wash it up because the ink fountain is behind it, but you feed the rolls from down here. This is just from waste card that I got from a customer of ours. And then it feeds through here, and then the plates are here. So that's what we're printing there. That's the Craftsman symbol, of course. So we ended up finding out that this was the original color, and using the German Raw book for the colors, we got a match for what it was originally. We figure it's mid-50s probably. No newer than that. Oh, I know what we should probably show you while we're here is as far as rebuilding, all of the shop work that we do is all on this side of the museum. We're in the midst of doing a Colombian right now, and you can see some of the parts that are here. All the parts are clean, repaired, ready to go on the machine. This is kind of what they look like when they're done. And this one's actually going out west. This is going to Met Printers in Vancouver. It's going to be in his lobby, George's lobby. That's one that we finished. This is not really that old. It's a 1906 date stamp there. We've got another one that we're working on right now, which is a Washington press. And this is the Colombian that you saw the parts at the back. So this is just, it's all been painted, and we're just going to wait to do the detailing as we assemble the machine. So this side here has got most of our process equipment for our rebuilding and our restoration purposes. All our storage is outside the building in containers. And we've got a machine shop here with a couple lathes and a mill, and our welding we all do at the back, because of course with old antique machines, there's always a lot of welding that comes up. Things are broken.
Nick, can you hear me?
I can.
So how much overlap is there in as far as your the people that do your restoration between your museum pieces and your business itself, your graphic design of the
There isn't any real overlap anymore. What we're doing now is we're taking a lot of the machines that we have out in storage, and we're going to move them on to other parties. There's no point in keeping them because we've got the Colombians that we want. We've already got too many Colombians in the museum.
Mhm.
And we've already got all that set. So all the extra machines that we have, we want to either sell them or donate them if it's the right cause.
Right.
So we're starting with these. So we don't actually do work for other people. It's very occasionally we do, but it's got to be special circumstances. But we usually are working on something that would go in our museum,
Right.
something that we want to showcase.
Right. You have to be pretty, I assume, fairly skilled machinist to work on some of these, to make some of these parts.
Yes, that's for sure. That's for sure. I've got a very good machinist that works with me. He's been here for about eight years, and he's a very good welder too. So he does all of that part of the work. Between the two of us, we basically get the machine up and running. It also involves on some machines like the Harris that I showed you earlier. A lot of these machines I didn't know anything about, like the Harris, for instance, or the Piccolo, those types of machines. So it involves a lot of research and figuring things out.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, it's amazing. You have so many items. How many do you have a number of how many presses you have out?
No, but I would bet that we've got several hundred artifacts here in the museum that I kind of quickly showed you today. Because we have a lot of smaller bits and pieces too that they're not really machines, they're parts of machines, or they're tools that were used to manufacture or test things. For example, I don't know if my video is working, but I've got these little machines here, these little test machines. They're for testing the perforation strength. When the business forms were busy running roll-to-roll business forms, they had to make sure that the burster for let's say like checks and whatnot would actually work and it wouldn't tear the sheet. And then we built this thing here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a little device that shows you how the German stop cylinder press worked. And we made that into a little display. And this is a display of the gas burners that happen to be on a Little Giant. And it shows how the gas burner system worked on printing presses of its day. Oh, here comes Liana, so she can, I was showing this gas burner here. Well, it wasn't on the machine like this, but we thought when we ended up scrapping this machine, we thought, why don't we showcase how it worked and what it looked like before it's all gone. And so we saved it. And same with this here. So if we have people come into the museum and they want to see the trick behind the safety fork mechanism for the stop cylinder, they can see how it worked. Wow. Working.
So we have a few questions in the chat. Maybe we can go to those right now.
Sure.
I know that there are probably more things you could show, and I would like to, maybe Art would like to have a few comments here at the end as well. But let's see. We've got a comment here I have to check out, but it's so wonderful. Such an embarrassment of riches with all these presses. Thank you for your work. I've heard of Howard Iron Works, but had no understanding of the scope of the collection and the incredible display. let's see, I can't read very well. I grew up in Oakville and visit family now, but had no idea of the museum. So I think you're saying I will certainly stop by next time. What's with the Egyptian statue display?
Well, first of all, to the lady that grew up in Oakville, I hope you do come and visit us when you're here next time. We're easy to find. And
this
second,
Linda Marshall. That was
Linda. Yeah. Well, nice to meet you, Linda. The other thing we should mention is the Egyptian display. That's a good question. No, it hasn't got anything to do with our museum. But when Liana and I bought the building, we bought it from a guy that was in the specialty plaster business. And he had this as a model inside the building. He also had full models of a West Coast indigenous statue. What would you call that one, Art? You should know. You came from Vancouver. The one on the left or the one on the right. And another one from Mexico, an indigenous emblem. Turns out these were made for the Royal Ontario Museum subway station. There's a subway station that stops right at the ROM Museum in Toronto, and they were commissioned either by the subway or the ROM to go in what they call the museum station.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
we're outside. Oh, here we are.
Yeah, we have.
Like totems. Mm-hmm.
Liana's taking pictures of them. Okay.
Right.
Anyway, we had King Tut, that's what we call him, which was also kind of, it's made, it's not an authentic one, of course, but it was made with the different symbols that were used at the time by somebody at the Royal Ontario Museum. And we decided to keep it in the museum. Mm-hmm. We thought it was kind of cool. And it was all white plaster, and then we just painted it. We just painted it a few months ago.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. And a little history, and it's nice to have a little history of the building. There are there. Let's see. I don't. Do we have any questions? Oh, Art, would you like to say anything of your perspective on what we've seen today?
Well, first of all, I would say that Nick and Howard were so gracious in terms of taking in visitors and students, and we brought our students here many times. And I've taken students to the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz, Germany, and I would say this museum really does compare. And the sort of personal, hands-on nature of the tour that you get here is very special. And so I think this is really a not to be missed opportunity anytime you're in the Toronto area or even anywhere in Eastern Canada.
Well, thank you, Art.
Yeah.
Very
yeah. Well, I think we're all very impressed with the quality. I'm just taken with the sheer beauty of the machines and the care that you've taken, Nick, with restoring them, and there was some art and care went into making the machines originally, and you've been able to carry that forward, it seems.
Yeah, I think our kind of our goal in the museum is there's so many wonderful museums out there, especially when it comes to typography and the use of typography. But what we are trying to do here is we always wanted to create a space where not always the winners or the more common machines are shown. There is obviously much more than we could ever fit in this building that was made, but we've got a lot of odd machines that normally in North America you won't find, and yet in Europe you may find. But you don't, not in North America. There's mostly a lot of Americana over in North America, and you won't find too many stop cylinders, for instance, and some of these odd machines like the Pouts that we showed you. The Heresy one, you won't see one of those in the museum. The Smithsonian has one, but they've got it in storage. So it's not doing anyone much good there. And it tells an important part of our history. The history of the manufacture of printing machines is quite an interesting history. And it goes part and parcel with the history of printing itself.
Yeah. Well, we have been technology driven, and so it's one of the areas where we've seen advances in technology. I was struck by the two hands that were working with the moving the sheet off after it was printed. It looked like a little robot going there. So the early robotics, it seems, were at work here. Yeah. So I'm gonna change my view so that I have a gallery view, and so I can see everybody. Well, I can't see everybody, but see a number. Does anybody have any questions or comments? If so, just unmute yourself and raise a hand. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody again, and I see Tamara clapping, so there we go. I assume everybody else is doing the same. Thanks again, everyone, and see you soon.